Hi, guys. It's Kathy. I hope you're doing well. All right. Still part one of the OJ trial. This is, I rewound it a tiny bit. Still part one of the OJ trial. This is, I rewound it She's so annoying. She just doesn't shut up. Okay, I did rewind it just just like a minute. That way we can remember where we were at yesterday and get right back into it. And we'll see how far we get today. There's Nan. Everybody behave. Nan's here. She's gonna get you. She's gonna get you.
Session has been that these are snippets and that the defense is willing to take the risk and argument that they cannot lay an accurate foundation. The problem is that leads to the danger of misleading the jury, and I'm not willing to take that risk during the course of an opening statement, so that objection is sustained. As to the SOC chart, the language that is on the SOC chart comes from a summary of reports and testing. It is not the report itself. The objection is sustained as to the language, blood search, none obvious. In all other respects, the SOC timeline chart may be used. As to the conduct chart, the objection is sustained. These quotes, some of these quotes are taken out of context, and there's a danger of misleading the jury as a result, so that objection is sustained. All right, counsel, I think that, I did not rule yesterday on the, Mrs. Robertson reminded me I did not rule on the photograph of the defendant and four ladies in formal dress.
My notes say that the court did rule, Your Honor, that...
I noted I didn't check it off on my list, and Mrs. Robertson indicated I didn't rule. So the objection on that, as to that, is overruled. So the record's complete. All right, counsel, that takes care of that. Let me just advise counsel, tomorrow one of our sequestered jurors has a medical appointment, and we will adjourn tomorrow at 3:30. 3:30 to accommodate that. And I would also like to talk to counsel at some point in time regarding your proposal regarding a scene view when you get the opportunity. All right, anything else before we invite the jurors to join us?
Your Honor, maybe
A field trip. A scene view. Are they going to take the jury to both houses? Field trip.
And the new chart will be people's next in order, photocopy of that for the record purpose. All right, Mr. Hodgman.
Thank you and good morning, Your Honor. Your Honor, first of all, there's a matter that we will need to approach sidebar. I think the court can handle it quickly,
you work
but
too
it's
hard.
a point of information I think all of counsel need to know before we proceed with opening statement.
All right.
Then, before we do that, Your Honor, before we do that, I'm sorry. I was just... Yesterday we raised a discovery concern with regard to the defense. This morning I've been provided with another witness statement from the defense, a memorandum from a Mr. William Pavlik dated November 2nd, 1994. I had asked the court yesterday that the court order that the defense turn over all discovery that's in their pipeline, so to speak, because we don't want to be surprised anymore. Now, I have asked Mr. Douglas this morning, is this it? Is there any other witness statement that they have, regardless of age? And I believe his response was that he could not be definitive about it. Is that correct, Mr. Douglas?
no.
All right, I'll let him speak for himself. But what I would like the court to do is to remind the defense of their obligation to turn over to us witness statements, timely fashion. We're asking that everything be disgorged, as I did yesterday. And I would like to have that order made clear for the defense.
Mr. Douglas?
Sure.
Your Honor, yesterday there was a specific reference made to an interview of a Scott Matsuda, whose name was added to the witness list, and I specifically had asked my investigator for that particular report, and I asked him to check to make sure that none of the names that were added that there were any reports that had not been turned over. That was the report that I was given. That was the report that I turned over. And I will again endeavor to review my files, to review the files of the other counsel, and to make sure that there are not any other reports still outstanding that have not been turned over. And if I find so, I'll give them to Mr. Hodgman.
All right, I would like for you to report back to the court tomorrow morning, Mr. Douglas, as to that search. All right. All right, Mr. Hodgman, can we approach now?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Facebook has 3.7 billion monthly active users in 2024. That makes them the largest active social media platform. Yep, bigger than TikTok, bigger than YouTube. Why? Because old people like Facebook. Because there's games on there they can play, like Candy Crush. And farming. Yeah, they are all over 65. Guess who watches my videos here? Guess who watches my streams? Old people like me and you. I'm on TikTok, yeah, but barely. Like I post a court short. Yep. Yes, you are. You are 45 and 47, and you are watching court cases. Do you know how to floss? Are you playing Fortnite? I just have a sneaky suspicion that there is a large amount of people on Facebook that would like court cases that don't ever go to YouTube. Am I low for real though, Donald? Am I low? No, you're old. I get it now. I get it. I get it. I get it. I'm old. I'm old and grumpy.
We'll stand in recess until 10:30, and we will begin opening statements at 10:30. All right, Deputy Jex, we need the jury statement.
If you look at my data,
All right, back on the record in the
Facebook is where I
Simpson
need to
matter.
get
Mr.
people.
Simpson is again present before the court with his counsel, Mr. Shapiro, Mr. Ullman, Mr. Cochran, Mr. Douglas, Mr. Bailey, people represented by...
I could just get the YouTube people. I could. I could just try to keep getting the same YouTube people over and over and over again. However, I really, really, really do think that there are a large number of people that have not seen any of these court clips yet. I didn't. I mean, one day I stumbled onto one. I believe there are a large number of these people out there. And I believe, like, the first one you see, the first person showing court clips you see, you sort of like the first person I saw was Law Talk with Mike, and I thought he was excellent, and it was all excellent. So I just think if I can get over there and introduce some of those people to court clips, that I don't know. I think it'll attract different people, not the same people going to all of the channels. Different people, right? Is that stupid? Is that just Am I wasting my time?
Ms. Clark, Mr. Darden, and Mr. Hodgman. The jury is not present. Deputy Magnero, may we have the jury, please?
Bren, all the other ones are professional. Go watch the other ones. Some people don't know about it. I didn't know about it until I knew about it.
All right, counsel in the audience, please be seated. All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to begin with the opening statements made by the lawyers in the case. Let me remind you from my instructions to you yesterday that any statements made to you by the attorneys during the course of their opening statements are not evidence and should not be considered as such by you. These opening statements are normally given by the attorneys to sort of give you an overall view of the evidence that they intend to present. It's to give you a roadmap, so to speak, as to how to evaluate the evidence. This case, as you know, will be relatively long, and by necessity, some of this evidence will be presented to you out of chronological or logical order. So they'll need to explain to you the case that they intend to present. All right, are both sides prepared
People
to
in
go
court is
forward,
great.
Mr. Paquin?
We are, Your Honor.
Mrs. Clark?
Yes, we are, Your Honor.
All right, do the people wish to make an opening statement?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
All right, you may proceed. Mr. Darden? Thank you.
Your Honor, Judge Ito, Mr. Cochran, and Mr. Shapiro and Dean Ullman, and to my colleagues seated here today in front of you, and to the real parties in interest in this case, the Brown family, the Goldman family, and the Simpson family, and to you ladies and gentlemen of the jury, good morning. I think it's fair to say that I have the toughest job in town today, except for the job that you have. Your job may just be a little bit tougher, but your job, and like my job, both have a central focus, a single objective, and that objective is justice, obviously. It's going to be a long trial, and I want you to know how much we appreciate your being on the panel. We appreciate the personal sacrifices you're making by being sequestered. We understand that can be difficult. And I'd like to thank you in advance for keeping the promises you made to us when you were selected for the jury initially. You promised to be fair. You promised to be open-minded. You promised to hear and see and carefully consider all the evidence in the case. And you promised to find this case, to come to a verdict in this case solely on the basis of the evidence and the law given to you by Judge Ito. And you promised to do that based on the law, based on the facts and the evidence, and nothing else. You promised us that you had no hidden agenda, that you only wanted to see justice done, and you promised us that you would do everything you could under the law to see that justice was done. And so I thank you for that, and I thank you in advance for the verdict you will at some point render in this case. And we're here today, obviously, to resolve an issue, to settle a question that has been on the minds of people throughout the country these last 7 months. It certainly has been on the mind of my people up in Richmond, California, and friends in Fayetteville, Georgia, and all across the country, and everybody wants to know, and everybody I know often posed the question to me, did O.J. Simpson really kill Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman? Well, finally, ladies and gentlemen, I am here in front of you this morning to answer that question. And we'll answer that question from the witness stand and from the exhibits you'll see in this case and from the evidence. And when you see the evidence and when you hear the witnesses and when you put it all together and consider the totality of circumstances in this case, the answer will be clear to you as well. The answer to the question is yes. The evidence will show that the answer to the question is yes. O.J. Simpson murdered Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman. And I'm sure you'll be wondering why as the trial proceeds on, and I'm sure you're wondering why right now. As the judge instructed you already, opening statements are not evidence. Opening statements are given by lawyers, and in an opening statement, we inform the jury of what we think the evidence will show in this case, what we believe the evidence will show. But we're lawyers. We're not witnesses. We're not under oath. Nothing we say is evidence. The things we say to you today are not the things that you should carry into the jury room and into deliberations. You should carry into the jury room and into your deliberations the evidence in the case, the testimony from the witness stand, the exhibits admitted at trial, the instructions given to you by the court. And when you look at all of that, when you go back and reflect on the testimony and the exhibits and everything you heard and saw in this case, you'll know why he killed Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman. And when I give you the answer as I have, and you consider and you stop and consider and you think, why would he do it? Why would he do it? Not O.J. Simpson, not the O.J. Simpson we think we know, not the O.J. Simpson we've seen over the years. But that raises another question, and that question is, do you know O.J. Simpson? We've seen him play football for USC. We watched him thrash UCLA and play in the Rose Bowl. We watched him win the Heisman Trophy. He may be the best running back in the history of the NFL. We watched him leap turnstiles and chairs and run to airplanes in the Hertz commercials. And we watched him with a 50-inch afro and Naked Gun 33.5. And we've seen him time and time again. And we came to think that we know him. What we've been seeing, ladies and gentlemen, is the public face, the public persona, the face of the athlete, the face of the actor. It is not the actor who is on trial here today, ladies and gentlemen. It is not that public face. It is his other face. Like many men in public, like many public men, they have a public image, a public persona, a public side, a public life, and they also have a private side, a private life, a private face. And that is the face we will expose to you in this trial. The other side of O.J. Simpson, the side you've never met before. We will expose in this trial and show to you in this trial that other face, the face he wore behind the locks and the gates and the walls at Rockingham, that other face, the one that Nicole Brown encountered almost every day of her adult life, the one she encountered during the last moments of her adult life.
I'm too
The same
exhausted
face
to have a private face.
Ronald Goldman encountered during the last moments of his life. When we look upon and look behind that public face, the public face of the man who sits here in court today, you'll see a different face. And the evidence will show that the face you will see and the man that you will see will be the face of a batterer, a wife beater, an abuser, a controller. You'll see the face of Ron's and Nicole's murderer. To understand what happened at Bundy, we need to examine this defendant's relationship with Nicole. Because when we do, we can discern from that, we can see a motive. We can see his motive for killing his ex-wife. And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that as the trial proceeds on, and as you hear the evidence in this case, that motive will become clear. He killed Nicole for a single reason. Not because he hated her. He didn't hate Nicole. He didn't kill her because he didn't love her anymore, because in his mind, he did. He killed her for a reason almost as old as mankind itself. He killed her out of jealousy. He killed her because he couldn't have her. And if he couldn't have her, he didn't want anybody else to have her. He killed her to control her. Control is a continuing theme. It was a continuing theme. The central focus of their entire relationship. By killing Nicole, this defendant assumed total control over her. By killing her, he committed the ultimate act of control. By killing her, no one else could have her. No one but him. And he killed Ron Goldman. And he killed Ron Goldman for another reason. He killed Ron Goldman because he got in the way. He killed Nicole because he had a problem with her, as men and women sometimes do have in relationships. They have a problem. And this defendant's problem, the man in the courtroom, I think he stated his problem rather eloquently at his weight, as he stood over his body at his weight. And he said then, and he said on other occasions, and I quote, he said, while standing over that casket, while standing over Nicole's body, my problem was that I loved you too much. But it wasn't really love, ladies and gentlemen. And this will be reflected in the evidence, and the evidence will establish this, that it wasn't really love. What this defendant had for Nicole Brown wasn't love, it was obsession. He became obsessed with her. And his obsession was so great that he developed a need
Victoria's obsessed with me, totally. Totally.
to control her. And his need to control and his feelings of obsession, his obsession was so great that when he came to realize that he could not keep her, he killed her. Because to let her go would mean to lose control of her. To let her go with Ron Goldman or someone else would mean to lose control. He couldn't have her. And neither could anyone else. Now, the evidence in this case will establish that the man in the courtroom, this defendant, is an extremely controlling and possessive man. And as I said before, control and possessiveness was a single dominant theme throughout their relationship. And he controlled her in a variety of ways. He controlled her financially. When the defendant and Nicole first met, she was barely 18 years old. He was almost 30. She shared an apartment. He owned a mansion. She waited tables at a restaurant. He was a millionaire. No one had ever heard of Nicole Brown, but he was one of the most recognized men in America. But after he met her, he slowly began to control her. She shared an apartment with a friend. He got her own apartment. He bought her things. He gave her things. The time she was 19, she was driving a Porsche. He got it for her. He began to gain control over her. And throughout the years, throughout their relationship, he maintained that economic control over her, that financial control. The evidence will show that Nicole never really held a job. She never really worked. She never really operated a business. She never had an income really of her own. Throughout her entire adult life, this man, the defendant in the courtroom, held the purse strings in her life. Whatever money she got, whatever material possessions she got from the defendant. People can sometimes be bought. And young people sometimes can be easily misled. Nicole was a very young woman, if a woman at all, when she first met this defendant, the man seated in the courtroom. And as the years went on, and as they continued to date, and as he gained more and more control over her, the more control he gained, the more abusive he became. As you listen to the evidence in this case, you're going to be hearing evidence regarding domestic abuse, domestic violence, stalking, intimidation, physical abuse, wife beating, public humiliation. As you listen to the trial and as you hear this evidence and see this evidence, please keep in mind that all of these different kinds of abuse were all different methods to control her. Let me proceed on. The evidence will show in this case that he abused her mentally. He stripped her of her self-esteem. This defendant dictated the way Nicole would dress. He dictated the way she would wear her hair. And when he didn't like her appearance, he would criticize her, he would humiliate her to the point that she would cry. If he didn't like her shoes, he'd go out and buy shoes. This is what I want you to wear. Wear this, look like this. She was not a Barbie doll, ladies and gentlemen. The evidence would show that he was so controlling that he attempted to define her identity. He attempted to define who she was. When she was pregnant and put on weight, the evidence would show that this defendant was so abusive that he called her names. He called her fat. He called her a pig. And he did this in the presence of her family and in the presence of her friends. And he humiliated her. And that is the face we intend to expose in this trial. That's the other side of this defendant we're going to show you in this trial. And by doing these things and by hurling these insults, he stripped her of her self-esteem. And when you're controlling someone financially, and when they have no self-esteem, and when they have no identity, you have them. You control them.
Time out. I'm sorry, but time out. Okay, he's a monster. He did all that. He's a monster. He is. But you have to go back 30 years, 25 years, 30 years or more when this happened. So, in the 80s, they were together, like they lived through the 80s together. In the 80s, that wasn't really that out of the norm. That she didn't work. Only he works. And, so if you look at all the good housekeeping books and things like that, we were raised to believe that we are supposed to look a certain way for our husbands and keep a house a certain way for our husbands and do this for our husbands because our husbands go to work. So So back then, it was horrible. What he did was horrible. I'm not saying that it was okay what he did, you know. But back then, when she was in her teens and they were getting married, and she was, yeah, but no, because I lived through the 80s. I lived through the 80s, and that's the way we were raised. This is what you do for your husband. In the 80s, the women didn't have a lot of jobs. They were starting to work more, but they didn't. They, they weren't head of households. They they were just weren't. There was women weren't the head of the household, earning the money. They made what 50 cents on the dollar back then. Yeah, I mean, I I always had more money than my husband's, always. But that was not normal. What I did was not normal. So, yes, she didn't work. That's not that crazy back then. Today it's crazy. But back then it wasn't that crazy. He's still a monster. 100% a monster. I'm not saying he's not a monster. I'm just saying, in today's eyes, people who are watching this trial with 2025 eyes on, put it in perspective. It's still bad. Terrible. Horrible.
The evidence would show that this
I
defendant,
don't
this
think I
man in the
went back to
courtroom,
the
was a very
50s.
controlling
I don't think
and
so.
possessive man. And that the dominant theme throughout their relationship was his control of Nicole Brown. But he did more. He did more than just demean her in the presence of others. He attempted to isolate her, sometimes from some people. When certain men came around, he became jealous. And he became so jealous that it got to the point that she would not agree or want to be around certain men because she was concerned that he might get jealous by their mere presence. And as time went on, and as he became jealous, and more jealous, he even insisted that she not be around certain men. He began to isolate her, ladies and gentlemen. When her friends came around, her girlfriends came around, and when he felt that she was spending too much time with those girlfriends, he talked to the girlfriends. He let them know he didn't like them hanging around.
It wasn't immediate.
He dissuaded her girlfriends from.
Because all those ladies were still growing up to believe a certain way. I mean, it still hasn't been. It's not anywhere like it used to be at all, at all. But my one daughter, I could see her not working and just her boyfriend working. I could see that happening. I pray it doesn't, but I could see it.
Hanging around. He attempted to isolate her from other people. And when you isolate someone, and when you have economic control over someone, and when you strip someone of their self-esteem, and when you establish their
Good job,
identity,
Mom.
you have them. They're yours. You can control them. And the evidence will show in this case that this man is an extremely possessive and controlling individual, and that he is an extremely obsessive individual when it came to Nicole. And his obsession was manifested by the things he did toward controlling her.
Okay, I mean, even now, people feel completely comfortable offering me their opinions on how I should wear, how I should dress, how I should do this, how I should do that. But like my boss at work, Dean, Mark, there's two bosses. I can't imagine someone going up to Dean or Mark and saying, you know what? I think that you should wear a different pair of pants tomorrow. I think that you should wear khakis instead of jeans. I can't even imagine in a million years someone going up to my boss and say, you know what? Maybe you should get a haircut. I think you should get a haircut. It's just, it's still the same. I mean, not the same. I know it's not the same, but and even uh, I'll leave it at that. I'll leave it at it's still not there. It's still not right.
but demeaning her and controlling the purse strings and isolating her and defining who she would see and who she wouldn't see and who her friends would be and who they would not be wasn't all this defendant did to control this woman. There are more powerful forms of control. There's force. There's violence. There's fear. There's intimidation. And you will hear testimony. You will see evidence
That was normal. It was normal.
that in his quest to control Nicole, this defendant used all these things. He used fear. He used intimidation. And he used violence. And he instilled such a fear in her, ladies and gentlemen. She heard testimony that he could walk into a room. He could walk into a room, and Nicole would be there. And a moment before he walked in, she would just be the most charming individual there is, relaxed.
I know how
But
to
when he
tie a
walked
tie.
in, her demeanor changed completely. As time went on, his mere presence became intimidating to her. I mentioned earlier that they met when she was around 18 years old back in 1977, and they dated for 8 years. And they eventually married in 1980.
And we've all quit a job because the boss was perverted. Us ladies. I don't know how many men have quit a job because their bosses were perverted. That's nothing, that's not out of the ordinary. It's just not.
5. And the marriage was a stormy marriage. And it was a marriage punctuated by acts of violence. And that violence would always be followed by an apology. He would apologize, give her jewelry, buy her flowers. He would promise to do better.
When I was serving tables at Bob's Big Boy, I had to wear my polyester skirt and pantyhose. And if my pantyhose got a runner, I would be sent home to get new pantyhose. And I had to have 50 bobby pins in my hair, or they would send me home.
Promised to maintain control of himself. And he would promise not to do it again. And then those acts of violence would be followed by additional acts of violence, and it became a cycle. Violence, apologies, a period of quiet and calm, then violence and apologies, quiet and calm, violence, apologies, quiet, calm. A cycle of violence characterized their relationship. It characterized their marriage. And domestic violence, ladies and gentlemen,
I'm not talking about OJ. I'm talking about other. It wasn't abuse, though, Anthony, to tell a woman that, she should wear a shorter skirt or unbutton that one right there. That was normal. The men were raised to say that. They were supposed to say that. It was a compliment. They were trying to compliment them. When they tell them, you should wear this, they're giving them a compliment. They're saying, I like you in this. You should wear that. I like you in that. So you should wear that. That's how they were raised.
That's a difficult topic because domestic violence is something that happens behind the gates and the walls. It happens in the bedroom and inside the home and in places where the public can't see. Domestic violence is a private affair, generally, while it's occurring. And so it makes it difficult to obtain evidence, to gain proof that the violence occurred. And it makes it difficult to obtain evidence and gain proof that the relationship is a violent relationship. But we do have that proof. We do have proof. We do have evidence. You will hear testimony from witnesses in this case, and they will discuss the violent relationship, the violent marriage this defendant had with Nicole Brown. In 1985, the police responded to the defendant's home in Rockingham in response to a call. And when they arrived, they were met by Nicole. She was crying. She was upset. And her face was puffy. And she was near hysterics. And she told these people, she said, we had a fight. After the fight, I was trying to leave, and when I tried to leave, the defendant grabbed a baseball bat, and he took that baseball bat and he smashed the windshield to my car. This is 1985. And as they looked around, these law enforcement officers, they looked to the right, and they saw a white 450 SL Mercedes-Benz. And the windshield was smashed out. And just then the defendant came out of the house. And he offered an explanation. Well, the police didn't arrest him. They left. They left Nicole there. They left the defendant there. And that isn't an act of physical violence toward Nicole, is it? Or is it? Maybe it is. Nicole Brown was there to witness this act, this violence on her vehicle. And if you're married to someone and you love someone and you have a fight with them and they take a baseball bat and they do something like that to one of your prized possessions, could it be that they're sending a message? The evidence will show that this was a message. It was an indication. It was a warning as to what would happen next. It was a warning that what happened to this Mercedes-Benz could just as well happen to you. And it did happen to Nicole. Not with the baseball bat, but just like that Mercedes got smashed and dented, so did Nicole. You'll be hearing evidence. You'll be hearing testimony. You'll be seeing witnesses in this case regarding an incident that happened on January 1, 1989. It was almost 4 o'clock in the morning on January 1st when the 911 operator received a telephone call from Rockingham. And that operator will be here to testify in court. And that operator will be here to authenticate the tape of that 911 call from Rockingham. And when the operator appears and when the tape is played, listen very carefully. Because if you listen carefully, in the background you will hear a woman screaming. And you will hear something else. You will hear the sound of this defendant, this man, beating this woman.
Slacker.
You will hear the sound of his hand smacking across her face. You will hear the sound of this defendant beating his wife.
I don't know if I want to hear that, though.
Well, the police arrived. They arrived at Rockingham in response to that telephone call, and Nicole never got to tell the 911 operator to come and help me or anything like that. All she did was scream, and the operator could hear her screaming, and the operator could hear her being beaten, and she advised LAPD units to respond to 360 North Rockingham. We can hear the sound of a woman being beaten now, right?
I don't want to hear that. I'm not going to be happy when we play that, guys. Bill, I have not watched one of your streams all year. I'm sorry. All year.
Right now. And the officers arrived at Rockingham a short time later. And when they did, they rang the buzzer to the security gate. And as they did so, they saw someone run from the bushes, run from the darkness in their direction. And this person that they saw was Nicole. And Nicole came running out of the darkness, wearing nothing but sweatpants and a bra, running toward the officers. And she was covered with mud, and she was dirty, and she was filthy. And she ran toward the officers. And as she ran toward the officers, she was shouting and yelling, "He's going to kill me! He's going to kill me!" And the officers stood there. They didn't know what to do. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. She's out in her bra, sweatpants, and covered with mud. They just got a call. There's a woman in Rockingham being beaten now. She comes running out of the darkness and out of the mud and out of the bushes. And she pushes the button to the security gate, and she runs through the gate, and she collapses in the arms of the officer. The entire time she's yelling, "He's going to kill me. He's going to kill me." And the officer said, Who's going to kill you? And she said, "OJ is going to kill me." And the officers looked. They looked at Nicole. Her eye was swollen, bruised. Her lip was cut. And one of the officers, the senior officer there, he looked at her neck. And what he saw startled him. On her neck, he could see the imprint of a hand. The imprint of a hand around her neck. Well, it was then that the defendant came out of the house. He was wearing nothing but his bathrobe. And he did not address his wife at the time. And he did not ask the police how she was doing or if she was okay. And what the evidence will show, and what you will hear in this case, is that he demeaned and humiliated her even more. He shouted to the officers in the presence of Nicole, his wife, "I've got 2 women now. I don't need that one. I don't want that one in my bed anymore." This was his wife, and this is what he said to these officers who were strangers to him. This is what he shouted out to the police. The officers were on one side of the gate of the wall, and the defendant at that time was on the other side. The officer said, "Mr. Simpson, we're going to have to place you under arrest. It appears that your wife has been beaten. So please go back into the house and put on some clothes and come with us. We're going to take you to the station." Well, the evidence would show that that did not sit well with this defendant. And he responded, "The police have been here 8 times before. And now you're going to arrest me for this? 8 times. That's what the defendant said. The police had been there 8 times before. And as he said, "You're going to arrest me for this?" defendant told the officers, "This is a family matter." That's what the evidence would show. The defendant said to the officers, "This is a family matter." And he asked, "Why do you want to make such a big deal out of it? We can handle it." The evidence would show that the officers did not like the way he had handled things up to that point. And they insisted that he get dressed. And they told him that he was under arrest and that they were going to take him to the station. Well, this was O.J. Simpson. And he did get dressed. But he didn't go to the police station. He jumped in his Bentley and he sped away, and they chased after him. They didn't catch him, and he got away. The next day, he went to the Rose Bowl.
I didn't know any of this.
But despite this, despite 89, what happened on January 1, 89, despite the Mercedes-Benz incident in 1985, she stayed. She stayed with him. And I'm not suggesting, and the evidence won't suggest, that every day of their marriage or their relationship was stormy, rocky, and filled with violence. That's not what we're suggesting here. But we are suggesting, and the evidence will show, that there was a cycle of violence. A cycle of violence, and the dominant theme in that relationship and in that cycle, and the ultimate objective was always control. Control. Well, after the 89 incident, after that night, their relationship changed somewhat. She was concerned. And the defendant was concerned. The defendant is a public man, and he was concerned about his public image. And in the public domain and in the public media, back in 1989, he was interviewed by Roy Firestone on ESPN. And during that interview, Mr. Firestone asked the defendant about that incident on the morning of January 1. And the defendant downplayed it. He minimized things, fluffed it over. And you'll hear and see that interview. And in that interview, the defendant said it was sort of a mutual wrestling match. She was wrong, he was wrong. Ta-da. No big deal. And that's what he said to the press and to the public. He minimized things. But you'll hear testimony from investigators employed with the DA's office, and they'll tell you about a day just a few months ago when they drilled a hole in the safe deposit box, Nicole's safe deposit box. And they'll tell you about the day that they recovered photographs taken of Nicole's injuries back in 1989. And they'll also tell you about the recovery of some letters the defendant wrote to Nicole after the 1989 beating. And you'll see those letters. They'll be here. You'll be able to read them. And you'll note that the account the defendant gave the press and the media and the public was not the same account he gave Nicole in those letters during that apology phase, the contrition phase, the phase he was going through. In the letter he wrote to Nicole, he apologized for hurting her. In the letter he wrote to Nicole, he admitted that he had lost control. And in the letter to Nicole, he said the same old thing he'd been saying all along, and that is that I will do better. We can get through this. And that happens in bad relationships and in abusive relationships, doesn't it? Things get bad things happen. It's always somebody's fault. But nobody wants to take the blame. And in this situation, and the evidence will show that what the defendant did was he made these promises. He sort of roped her back in. You know how it is. Bad relationship, I'll do better, here's a gift, I'm sorry. And they just rope you back into it. And if you're the other person in Nicole's position, as she was, and this will be reflected in the evidence, she wanted to believe. She wanted to believe that her marriage could survive. She wanted to have hope, and he gave her hope for a while. Because this is a cycle. And so he beat her up on January 1, and he admitted to her privately in his letters that he was responsible. And he apologized, and he gave her things, and he tried to make it all better, and he gave her hope, and he roped her back in, and she stayed. She stayed because she had hope and because she wanted to believe that January 1, 1989 would be the last time that he would abuse her, physically or mentally. As you hear the evidence in this case, something very sad becomes very apparent. They met when she was 18, and he was almost 30. And in 1992, they divorced.
When do you go back, Buzzy?
She was only 33 or so. And she died when she was almost 35. Throughout her adult life, throughout most of her adult life, her concept of marriage and a relationship was defined by this defendant. That was adult love. Her notion of adult love for 15 years was what this defendant gave her. And he abused her throughout that relationship. Well, as I said before, sometimes you get roped in, people get roped in. Nicole got roped in by the defendant, and she stayed, and she stayed. And people stay in those situations, those abusive relationships, for years and years, until one or two things happen. One, they just can't take it anymore. Or two, until they just can't take it anymore and they wake up to reality. And finally, in 1992, Nicole woke up to the reality of her situation. And in January 1992, she moved from Rockingham. She left the defendant and she filed for divorce. Well, this did not sit well with this defendant, and this will be reflected in the evidence. He did not like this. He did not like the fact that Nicole was leaving his house, going somewhere else to live in her own house, away from him. There's that issue of control.
Have fun, Buzzy.
How could he control her? She wasn't right there with him. And he didn't take it well, and he lost 20 to 25 pounds like that. And almost on a daily basis, he would call her sisters, Dominique and Tanya and Denise. And he'd call her mother and her father, sometimes crying on the telephone. And he would call them, and he would whine to them, And, and he'd tell them how much he loved her and how he wanted her back. He'd use them to try and rope her back in. Well, she couldn't let him go, not completely. I mean, how could she? She'd been under his control for 15 or 16 years. And so she didn't go too far. She rented a house in Brentwood on Gretna Green. They saw each other. They had children together, lovely children. You'll probably be seeing a picture of one pretty soon. But he couldn't deal with the loss of Nicole. He couldn't deal with not having her there. He couldn't deal with the loss of control, and he couldn't help but pursue her. You'll hear a testimony in this case from Nicole's mother, and she'll tell you about some of the telephone conversations she had with the defendant after 1992, and some even more recent. And in one conversation, he told her, he said, all my friends tell me that I should just leave her alone, just forget about it, just go on with my own life. And when Mrs. Brown said, why don't you do that? Let her go. If you let her go, then maybe she'll come back to you. Just let her go and maybe she'll come back. And his response was, I can't. You know I can't. You know I can't help myself. I can't let her go. He couldn't let her go. He couldn't help but pursue her. He couldn't leave her alone. He couldn't handle the loss of control. And because she had left his house and moved somewhere else and established her own home, her own house, and began establishing her own relationships, he did the only thing he could do to gain control, to try to regain control, to try to find out what was going on with her. And so he stalked her. He stalked her. When she left Rockingham in January of '92 and set up a new household on Gretna Green, also in Brentwood, she began dating a man named Keith Zalamzowicz. And she got a babysitter for their 2 children. Whenever Keith and Nicole would go out, not every time, but enough, he would show up. They went to a nightclub, and Keith will tell you about this. He'll be here to testify. The defendant showed up. They went to a restaurant called the Tryst. It had just opened. Nicole and Keith and some other friends, they were there. They got a table. They began to have dinner. And as they sat there having dinner, guess who showed up? Guess who attempted to gain control again? The defendant showed up. And that'll be reflected in the evidence and in the testimony. And what he did is he walked into the restaurant. He saw Nicole and Keith and her other friends. He went to another table. He grabbed a chair. Now, the chair was facing in an opposite direction, but he grabbed the chair. He turned it around. He sat there staring at Keith and Nicole and their dinner party. Well, Keith will be here to tell you that that was an awfully intimidating experience. Why? There was another incident at the Mezzaluna. Nicole was there, Keith was there. The defendant suddenly showed up, drove up in front of the restaurant, got out of the car, walked up to the table where they were seated, put his hands on it and said, "I'm O.J. Simpson and she's still my wife." Well, she filed for divorce and moved out of his house. that was intimidating. And there's more. And you'll hear about the other incidents. There's more evidence of stalking in this case, and you'll hear about that. There was one evening when Keith and Nicole, they went to a comedy show. And after the show, they went to Nicole's house on Gretna Green. It was about 3 in the morning. And they were seated on the sofa in her living room. The kids were upstairs asleep. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. And Keith and Nicole made love on the couch. But they weren't alone. There was somebody watching. There was someone watching through the window. It was the defendant. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he was looking through Nicole's window, watching her make love to another man. And the next day, when Keith and Nicole were together, he walked right into her house. And he was beside himself, and he was angry. And he said some very naughty things. But one of the things that he said to Keith and Nicole was that he said, "I watched you last night. I watched you and I saw everything." Well, the evidence will show that that is some unusual behavior, to say the least. But the evidence will show also that this is all part of this cycle. It is all part of this dominant theme in their relationship. This is all part of his need to know everything about her, to know where she is, to know who she's with, to know what she's doing, to control her. It's control. It's all about control. And though he did not interrupt them during the middle of the act, and he didn't punch Keith out, and he didn't punch Nicole out, he still watched so that he would know. And to control her, he had to confront her with what he knew, to intimidate her, to keep her from doing it again. It's all about control. Well, over the months, Nicole still wanted to believe that they could be a family again together. And they would attempt reconciliation, and they would fail, and they would attempt again. And Nicole was as much a party to that as the defendant was. But there was a situation in October of 1993, an incident another control incident. He forced his way through the back door of her place on Gretna Green. He forced the door in. He entered her house without her permission, without her knowledge, and he confronted her, and he scared her. He frightened her, and he scared her so badly that she telephoned 911. And she asked for police assistance, and you will hear that tape, the tape of that 911 call, and you will meet the 911 operator. And you will hear the defendant in the background. This is October 1993. He watched Keith and Nicole have sex in April of 1992. And when you listen to the October 1993 911 tape, you can hear him in the background still yelling and shouting about what happened in April of 1992. But that 911 tape is a telling glimpse into their relationship. That's for sure. And it's also an example of this defendant's private side, his private face. The other man, the man in the courtroom, the man that's on trial here today. And you'll hear Nicole on the telephone talking to the operator. And as you listen to her, you can't help but discern from the tone of her voice and the things that she says that she's a tough woman, but that she's also afraid and intimidated. And not only that, but that she feels that her situation is hopeless. The evidence will show that by October of 1993, Nicole, her situation was hopeless, and she was helpless. Way back in 1989, the defendant said that the police had been to the house 8 times before and never done anything. Nicole said the same thing on the telephone to the 911 operator in 1993. Her situation was hopeless and she was helpless. And you can infer from the evidence that Nicole Brown expected or had no expectation that anyone would ever do anything to this defendant because he beat her. There was no help coming and she didn't expect any help. But you'll hear that telephone call. And you will hear the defendant, and you will get a true sense of the fear he instilled in her. And he didn't hit her that day. He didn't strike her, and he didn't punch her. He did go through the house to see who was there. But he didn't hurt her that day. Still, she stayed. Still, they remained involved. Not only in the sense that he was the father of her children, but they still attempted to reconcile. And over the months after October of 1993, they tried to get together and they failed. They tried to get together and they failed. And in May of 1994, it was Nicole's birthday. And the defendant gave her a very nice gift, a piece of jewelry. And they attempted to reconcile, for lack of a better description. But the evidence will show that it was a very brief attempt, because a few days later, Nicole called it quits. She woke up to the true reality of her situation. She couldn't be bought anymore. She couldn't live like that, and the evidence will show that she let the defendant know that it was over. This is it. Hasta la vista. And this was significant in the mind of this defendant, ladies and gentlemen.
What?
It was something that had never happened before. He would do things to her and he would try to appease her by giving her things, and she would accept those things and they would reconcile. But not this day. This day, she couldn't be appeased. She couldn't be bought. She couldn't be bribed. She had had enough around, and he sat in it, and he sat there facing Nicole, and he just stared at her.
I'm going to keep going, but it looks like they started the next video like 5 minutes back. So I'm gonna bump it forward a little bit because I don't need to hear all that again. Nope. One time in my life was more than enough to hear what we heard today. So I'm gonna go 2 minutes ahead in time. Caddy didn't hear all the other parts, guys. She missed it.
But there are some things you should know about this evidence that, as you hear it. This is not character assassination. This is evidence of a controlling personality, of a controlling relationship. It's proof of jealousy And as Ms. Clark talks and as the evidence...
No, it's fine for Kelly to think this is boring. That's perfectly okay. Not everybody likes long-winded opening statements. That's fine.
develops in this case, and as you hear it and see it and process it, you'll see that cycle of violence. You'll see how things escalated. You'll see how controlling he is. And you'll see why he would kill on June 12th. This is not character assassination. This is not some tabloid prosecution. The evidence you will hear in this case will be evidence of this defendant's life, of his conduct, the things he did. You hear evidence of his relationship with one of the victims. And as you hear it, as you hear the evidence and as you listen to Ms. Clark, you'll see how it is that Ron Goldman happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. As you listen to the evidence, you'll see that his decision to kill finally was merely a final link in a progressive chain of abusive and controlling conduct. And it was a chain that consisted of fear and intimidation and battery and emotional and mental abuse and economic abuse and control and stalking. And you'll see that there was a common scheme, a common plan in all of this, and that was to control her. It was all designed just to control her. And in controlling her, it was the private man, private O.J. Simpson. It was the defendant who committed that final, ultimate act of control. She left him. She was no longer in his control. He was obsessed with her. He could not stand to lose her. And so he murdered her. And as you hear the evidence in this case, it will become clear that in his mind, she belonged to him. And if he couldn't have her, then nobody could. Thank you.
Ms. Clark?
All right. She's going to probably take... Oh, she has props, y'all. Okay. Hold on. I'm looking. All right. Looks like we're going to do a 2-hour video tomorrow. We did 5 minutes of it today. But we're going to do a 2-hour one tomorrow. Wow, guys. That was an opening statement, all right. Jeesh. Holy cow. I don't know. I hate to leave it like that. I hate to leave it on this note. I wish I had some... I have one thing. I have one thing I can do. Maybe to get us out of here a little better.
Claim, Your Honour, is in paragraph 12 of the statement of claim, which I'll just seek to summarise. The effect of the claim is that Dr. Kolajesic began research and development into what's known as ionic liquid.
Thank you, dear. Okay. Thank you for coming out, guys. Thank you for doing OJ again. Tomorrow we hear Marsha, with all of her charts and props. I kind of can't wait, but I'm going to. Don't worry. I shall see you all again soon. I haven't seen American Courts all year, so I'm going to try to catch him later if he streams, which he should stream. Love you guys. See ya.